just waiting for my Wi-Fi. Good morning. Welcome to this week's edition of Learning Collective. I'm Ann Wynn, marketing specialist with Risk, and today's amazing lineup starts with the even more amazing Dr. Jen Murphy having a conversation with our very own Duncan Welder, discussing her insights on how to measure the outcomes of your learning technology investments and what kind of questions to ask. You've got to ask the right questions and the smart questions, and they'll be discussing that here shortly. But before we get started with the conversation, I'd like to introduce everyone to Dr. Jen Murphy, who I'm sure does not really need an introduction in this industry. But here we go. Jen Murphy, PhD, is the founder and CEO of Quantum Improvements Consulting, QIC, an Orlando-based firm specializing in the application of emerging technology to training for complex skills. A cognitive psychologist by trade, her work focuses on how to design, develop, implement, and evaluate training technology for the Department of Defense and other clients. At QIC, she leads a growing team of learning science professionals. And in addition to her many peer-reviewed publications, her work has been featured in the New York Times, the Pentagon Channel, and Signal magazine. So quite an impressive bio there, Dr. Murphy, or Jen, as we all know her personally. So thank you for joining us this morning. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I know many of our viewers are as well. So if you're catching this broadcast live, please feel free to drop in a comment or a question. And we'll definitely answer any questions you may have as the conversation flows along. And without further ado, I'm going to hop off so you guys can start the discussion.
Well, thank you. All right. Thanks, Ann. I appreciate it. Jen, I am thrilled to have you here this morning. I've been looking forward to having this conversation and getting Ann off the screen. So now there are no reins or bounds that we have to operate inside. Been looking forward to it, seriously.
Okay, let's talk about Tiger King.
Okay, go for it. So has this been the way that you've occupied your solo time recently?
My solo time? Yeah, well, so I feel like everyone has seen something at this point, but that's like 7 good hours of your life. And that was like the first week of quarantine, and I've moved on to Animal Crossing like everybody else. So it's a great way to kill a lot of time. So, but it keeps me out of trouble.
It requires very little mental investment.
Do you know what it doesn't require? So there are a lot of video games that I play that I suck at because they require being really good with a controller. So like when I play Call of Duty, I kind of suck because I'm just not that good at moving around with a joystick like that. I'm like old school ASDW and like the mouse and stuff. Like I was good with that, but this thing I still have trouble with. But you don't have to do anything time critical in Animal Crossing. So I have the time to screw up and get better at using my joystick. So that's really, there's that. And it's very chill, and there's like soothing music in the background, and then your friends can come over and hang out at your island, and you're like, hey guys, that's as close to seeing you as I can. Check out my cool hat. So, it's the first time in history that everyone is like, would you please just sit on your couch and play a video game?
Oh, sure.
Like that never happens. So I feel like we should all be taking advantage of that. Like all of the things, like kids, put down your phone. No, stay on your phone. Like just stay in the house. No, just sit down. So.
Gosh, I don't know if my kids have seen the outdoors in weeks now.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can see it. And also, it's like super hot down here in Florida. So like
sure.
You don't really want to go outside if you can't get in the pool.
No, understood. But that this kind of brings us right into the conversation too. There's a lot of the topics that really fit well in this whole conversation are about that computer-human interaction and what does that look like? How do we track those things? So There's probably some good natural experiment. There are definitely some good natural experiments going on right now with the world. As a matter of fact, I read your blog last week on the psychology behind hoard buying and the toilet paper hoarding.
Yeah, so actually, and that was really, there's a lot that goes into toilet paper, or like any hoarding or any social behaviors. Obviously, there's a lot going on. But the first thing that I thought of when I was thinking about people hoarding behavior is these experiments. So the that prisoner's dilemma paradigm is something, it's been used a lot since like the 50s even, to manipulate the extent to which people are willing to coordinate their behavior and altruism and stuff like that. And the more you know about the person you're playing against, the more likely you are to be altruistic. And the longer you're in the game with them, the more you're likely to be altruistic. And it's interesting because there's a lot of crossover between experimental psychology and game theory and philosophy and all the other logical pursuits that people engage in terms of like solving problems. So that paradigm is really interesting to me, and it's the first thing that I thought of when when you think about panic buying. And actually, it seems like very illogical behavior, but it's probably one of the more rational things that you like. This is a rational response to, oh my God, everybody's buying toilet paper. What do I do? Well, I need toilet paper. So,
Yep.
It's people not thinking about the long game. But I do think, to your previous point, the Corona times that we are in, which is what I call them, it has, if nothing else, demonstrated the value of data. And no, it has seriously. Like, what is everybody's complaint right now is that we don't have enough information. We don't have enough information. We don't have good data. We've never done this before. And how many armchair data analysts have you seen on your social media right now? Like, I've got a ton of friends, and I'm refraining from doing this myself. Although, like, I'll look at the numbers just to kind of be like, oh wow, that's a lot of people. That's like a lot of people, and they're around here. Like, that's kind of scary. Like, I'll do that to freak myself out daily because like you need to get your heart rate up somehow. And anyway, there are people who are like, oh, here's my model of the coronavirus. Oh, here's my model of the coronavirus, and here's mine. And oh, we're flattening the curve. Oh, we're going down. Oh, we're not really. Oh, did you look at Italy? Oh, here's what happened in 1918. And like, we're having discussions about data now, like throughout the country. And what you're seeing a lot of is misapplication of data, but mostly people who know just enough to be like kind of dangerous and saying things on the news like Dr. Phil is talking about this stuff. Like, why are we listening to Dr. Phil? Why are we listening to Dr. Oz? Like, what? And also, why am I not on Oprah? Like, I feel like if you can just get on TV and you have some sort of an advanced degree, people will listen to you. And like, that's totally inappropriate. But we do see now the value of it. And I do think in the future, organizations are learning now, and then everybody now, I think, is really starting to see the value of good data, because we need it to make decisions. And in this case, we're making life or death decisions about people. So, I think if nothing else, this proves out the argument that data are very, very important. And when I talk about data, I'm not just talking about numbers, right? Like, here's a number. Normally, when you think of data, you think of a spreadsheet and you think about like decimals and stuff like that. But all of the information that you put out in the world is data. And there's a premium on that, especially now. Like, you think about content in terms of digital media, anything that flows through technology that you interact with is a data exchange. And I think we are now seeing exactly how important that is.
Well, it's going to make me kind of look at a little bit longer timeline back, right? So if we step out of the Corona specific and just start looking at over the last 10 years or so, as we've had more and more online communications and the ability to interact with people and being bombarded with so much different information and information with very different purposes being shared. Do you feel like we're better now, better equipped, or becoming better equipped at filtering those things and saying, oh, valid, not sure about that, right? As far as, as we're taking this stream of data all the time, are we getting better at filtering it? Or are we just looking to find new data that supports our existing feelings, beliefs?
Well, so there's a lot to that. One, we have
big question to unpack.
Yeah, so we have better tools now than we ever have in history. And there are a lot of analytics platforms that exist right now, especially ones tied to learning record stores and things like that, that can actually give you insights in a way that pretty much anyone can understand. So the tools are there. The information is there. Like, we have access to more data now than we ever have before. But it all comes down to making sure that you know the right question to ask, and then understanding what differences in things mean. Because sometimes a 4 and a 5 are the same number depending on the math that you're doing. And sometimes 4 and 5 are very different numbers depending on the math that you're doing. So it's challenging. I think people will always look for the answers that they want to find. And, because we are so polarized these days, I think you can actually see that. I have conversations with people that it feels kind of like I'm living in a different world than they are. Because you can take the same pieces of information and spin it a bunch of different ways with the ground truth. And that's bad enough. But then you have people who are intentionally manipulating the news and manipulating stories and trying to freak everybody out, because freaking people out is a very lucrative business.
Sure.
And it's really bad. It's bad for us. Like, I don't pay attention to the national news. I don't read the news because, you will lose your mind because it's so confusing. And especially as a small business owner these days, we're trying to make decisions about our company. I was talking to my business partner the other day. I was like, when do we know if it's okay to go back to the office? Like, what's our metric? And trying to solve that problem right now is like, what are the data that we should be looking at to figure out when I can bring my employees back to the office? Like, all the La Croix in there is not going to drink itself. So, what's the metric? And depending on what data you're looking at, it's either totally safe or it's not safe, or this is something that's going to wipe out the entire population, or it's something that's only going to take out 0.001% of people, and y'all are not in a big risk group, so maybe it's okay to go back. We're struggling with that right now because nobody knows what to do and everyone's telling us a million different things. So, it is hard to figure out who to listen to and where to get your information from, for sure.
Oh yes, and there's, you said, beyond just the personal decision making there. When you do have, like you said, the responsibility for other people and their safety, kind of exponentially grows that concern.
Yeah, when is it going to be okay for us to travel again? We had to have that conversation yesterday because there's a trip that one of us might have to make in a month or so. I'm like, is that okay? How are we going to know?
Sure.
And it's on a very macro level now, because you are talking about life and death decisions. And usually when an organization is looking for data, they don't make these kinds of decisions. It's like, where do I invest my corporate resources? Do I invest it more in marketing? Do I invest it more in my people? Do I invest in training? Do I invest it in advertising? So it's, companies are trying to make those kinds of decisions. Do I hire people? Do I fire people? How do I train them? What do I give them that's the most useful? And that's very different than, am I putting my employees at risk of death?
Sure.
You know what I mean? So no, there are absolutely, and as Ann said, we do a lot of work for the military, and a lot of the situations that I've worked in, it is a life or death situation. for soldiers and for Marines and for other warfighters. Like some of the decisions they have to make ultimately could get them killed. So it's very important. But your average company doesn't really have to deal with that on a daily basis. So that doesn't mean they're not good questions to ask. So it is challenging though.
It's like, speaking of the military side there, and looking back at the answering or asking for smart questions to get down to data, I was going to say, I know Anne introduced quantum improvements a bit there, but I was wondering if you might give us a little bit of background on the group and some of the work that you're doing that you can talk about, and recognize there's like military stuff there, but if there was something there, I'd love to share with everybody a little bit more about what you guys do and your fit in the world.
Okay. Yeah, sure. I could talk about us all day. So yeah, first of all, I'm not ever allowed to name another company ever again because Quantum Improvements Consulting is really long. So UIC is what we call it. The only reason that the word consulting is on the end is there's another business in Florida called Quantum Improvements already.
Oh, great.
Well, I mean, who would have thought, right? But they make gazebos, which could be a quantum improvement in your life if you really need a gazebo. It could. Mm-hmm. But the idea behind it, quantum is a noun and an adjective, and it means like the smallest amount you can measure, and measuring stuff is kind of inherent to what we do. And it also means, in the quantum leap perspective, like something bigger, better, fast. So that's why that and improvements we're trying to make people's lives better and solve problems. A lot of the work that we do is for the military, but it focuses on training. And training for soldiers is a little bit different than training in an organization. In a lot of cases, in some cases it's not. We do a lot of work in the marksmanship area, and that's not something that most companies train.
Sure.
But yeah, a lot of what we do involves figuring out what needs to be trained. So doing a needs analysis, understanding what the root cause of the problem is. And a lot of that is sitting down and talking to people and reading. There's not a lot new under the sun even today. So figuring out how other people have tried to solve the problem before, figuring out what the gaps are, figuring out if it's a training problem or not. There are a lot of problems that we see that are actually not training problems, although training appears to be a magic bullet that everybody tries to apply to a problem. Is, I just train them better. Well, some things you can't train out. Some things they might be a people problem, but it's not necessarily a training problem. The fact that I will never be good at basketball is not a training problem. I went to basketball camp and I tried really hard. I'm 5'4". That's not a training problem. You can't fix that. So we do a lot of that. We do a lot of effectiveness evaluations. So figuring out if training works or any other piece works. That's part of our job too. We like looking at operational data, but there's a lot of data that you can pull out of training technology that I feel like a lot of people are starting to realize. So we work across platforms because we're in Orlando. We do a lot of work with the modeling and simulation industry down here. This is where all military simulation starts, is in Orlando. So we've done work with everything from mobile devices up to big, ginormous simulators, looking at different ways of presenting information in the technology. And then really, what are you supposed to measure? So kind of our sweet spot is figuring out your assessment strategy and plugging that in there and pulling cool insights out of technology, because the military invests an awful lot of money in training technology, like a lot. And the question that they ask every single year is this stuff worth the investment? And a lot of times after the fact, after they've already deployed this thing, we have to figure out if it's worth it. Well, it's a little too late at this point, but we try and work with companies and other organizations from the ground up and build that into the technology so you can pull the data out pretty easy.
Okay. Yeah, and that makes sense there. If you can design that data going in, right? You can stay on the front side of that process so you know that you have good data to analyze after the fact. A couple things there that you mentioned, one of those jumped to mind, because it's something I was writing on yesterday, was that fit of training, right? So very often, traditionally, there was this, hey, we've had an incident, we have a thing, we have a problem. We need to have some kind of training developed for it. So from a training standpoint, it was a bit of a kind of order taker, and then you go out and you fulfill that specific need, versus stepping back and saying, is this really a training problem? So how do you go about that challenge when you've got these groups that are saying, okay, we need a training solution for a problem, and gosh, first, is there really a training solution for this?
Yeah, well, I can actually give you a good example of this.
Okay.
So, so a lot of people think that they know what the problem is already, and a lot of people assume it's a training problem, right? So, once upon a time, these folks at Parris Island, which is like where the Marines do a lot of preliminary training, basic training, they were like, Jen, we got this problem. Like, all of our females that are going into the infantry suck at shooting. So what is up with that? And I was like, really? Let me see, the numbers that they pull down from all the training exercises. And that while there is a difference between the men and the women, like, most of the women were passing the test. But I was like, if they're getting the same training, like, maybe there's something else going on here. So I was like, let me come up there and hang out with y'all for a couple of days and see what you do. And let's see if there's a problem. And one of the things that we saw was that the way that the marksmanship instructors were treating the men was very different than the way they were treating the women. They were basically, two women, they're like, we know you're going to suck. You're going to be terrible at this, but just try. And you're like, well, you can't train, like, that's a training problem. It's not training the recruits, it's training the instructors, right? Like,
Sure.
Of course. And part of it just has to do with the logistics of holding that weapon. So one of the things that they did with the redesign of that weapon a few years ago was make an adjustable buttstock. So, like, my arms are not as long as most guys. And, if you're holding a rifle, you have to put it in your pocket here and, like, hold it. And there's an upper body strength disparity anyway, but part of that is, like, how long your arms are. So just reducing the length of buttstock was huge. In terms of making it more accessible for women to be able to shoot better. So, and those are not, it's not changing the training curriculum. Part of it was a human factors problem. And we do a lot of human factors analysis too, but the human factors of this, anything that's got that much of a physiological component to it, you have to consider how you're interacting with whatever it is that you're working with. So
Sure. Yeah. Look at the whole environment.
Yeah, for sure. So, so I was like, I cannot fix your problem by training your Marines differently. That's not what you thought the problem was. So, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it happens a lot. And human factors is, it's another area that we do a lot of work in, looking at usability of solutions too. Like, does it even respond in the way that you expect it to? Because sometimes solutions are badly designed because they don't take end user into perspective when they're designed, and that's going to keep you from doing anything with it.
So for those, pardon me. So for those spots where you get asked to come in for a post training intervention and look at effectiveness there. So if you know in advance, right, you can build things in, or you certainly have to ask the questions of what information you want to gather. But in those cases where you're coming in after the fact, how do you start turning over rocks to look at the effectiveness of that training, or what could be done there? Because that's seems like a big conversation to have. Is, gosh, you've invested, and certainly on the military side, it's big investment, right? It's these are any small change is a giant investment. So how do you start having that conversation around? Gosh, I need to look at what we're doing and figure out, is this still valid, right? Is this the best way to do this, the most efficient, most effective?
Yeah, and you have to be kind of delicate with these things too, because the first question that you have to ask is, what do you want to see at the end of the intervention, right? So if it's training, if it's performance support, whatever it is, like, what do you want to see as an organization? Like, what does right look like to you at the end of this?
The result of performance, generally.
Yeah, it's performance, or in some cases, it's we have a safety problem. How do I, decrease accidents? How do I increase productivity? How do I increase team cohesion? How do, like all sorts of different outcomes. Like, what do you really want to see? And then walk that back to what are people doing that reflect the thing that you want to see. The reason that it's delicate is that some people don't want the answer. Like, they don't want to hear that, whoops, this was not the right thing to do. Sorry that you invested all this money. And now they have to go brief that up the chain. And it's like, so there are a lot of questions that we ask about, not really, does this work or not, but how could it work better? Because it can always work better, and people will always accept that. But does this work or does this not work? It's not really like that. It's not the best question to ask, because it doesn't get at why something works or something doesn't work. And if you understand why something works or something doesn't work, then you can fix it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But what we try to do, a lot of people, and I see this a lot in L&D too, is like there's a focus on, okay, we're going to treat training as a singular, and so I'm going to give you a training.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. And then you've done this, and now you know everything that you're supposed to know, and problem solved, and we can move on to the next thing and like go back to your job. And learning doesn't work that way. Like, you don't learn a lot of things just one time, right? So it's not like I learned how to ride a bike one day, right? Like, it took me quite a while to learn how to ride. First, you have to figure out the balance thing, then you have to figure out like the speed thing, and then you get a bike that has like, gears and stuff. You have to figure that out too. So like, it takes you a while. And the other thing is, if you don't practice the things that you've learned, you're going to forget. Like,
mm-hmm.
you will not be able to do that stuff anymore. So, how often do we have to retrain you? But people try to think about training as a one-shot intervention, and they're like, okay, we did this, poof, we're done. Training effectiveness evaluation at the end of it. And so now you're good, and you have learned what you're supposed to learn. But that doesn't answer a lot of questions about how they learned, what they were having trouble with, and things like the rate of decay, and all of those things you have access to. I think the key to it is to not look at learning as a singular event, but as a process and something you go through your entire life. And also, it's the culmination of a bunch of different experiences that you have and the ability to practice it. And you can measure a lot of those things using technology. And that's one of the reasons that we work in the space that we do, because if you have a simulator, that machine is collecting information about everything you do. It's not usually used that way, but it's in there, and you can get it out. So, a good example is this little mobile app that we have in the world now that we worked with Float and the Learning Ninjas and Veracity, and took a village. But you can plug time. So you can download our app, Sense, on the Google and Apple stores right now for free, the financial literacy training app. But the cool thing about it is that XAPI is baked into it. XAPI is baked into everything we do, because I do buy into the whole idea of persistent learning and stuff like that. And we can pull information about everything that somebody does in that application. And we are now looking at the paths that people take through the application to see, can they access all of the content? And this is, a usability question that we can answer using data. And I don't have to sit there with them anymore and look over their shoulder. Like, I can see, okay, here's a piece of content that nobody has accessed. I have to swipe 3 times to get to it. That's probably why, right? Like, you can make some inferences. You can look at how often people come back to the same content. You can look at if they do the little tests in there. You can look at what they're searching for. You can look at how they go through the different pieces of content, when they stop, when they pick it back up, and stuff like that. So that gives you a lot more insight into how people are using the application. And it's a lot more complicated than just like, hey, did you complete this course? Poof, there you go. But things like mobile apps, if you use them for learning or performance support or getting to Walmart, whatever you use it for, those are typically designed to not be one and done solutions. Like you don't do it one time. Like I use Google Maps when, back in the day when I used to drive around, like there was a time that I would get in my car and like go places, and then I get out of the car and I go see other people. Like back in those times, I would just have Google Maps on all the time because I want that to be smarter and tell me where I'm supposed to be going on a Saturday at noon. Like, yeah, Jen, it's time to go to Pilates. So there's all sorts of insights that you can pull out of technology these days, but it's really, the value of it is looking at performance over time and acknowledging that you don't just learn anything once, and everything you learn, if you don't practice it, you're going to have to learn it again. So.
Yeah, I say this is again back one of the things I've been thinking about recently on the performance support side of the world, and how do you get information in front of people and move away from that one and done model that has not ever been particularly effective, but you can brush a lot of people at the same time, right? I mean, it's what I always called sheep dip training, right? Where it's like, all right, everybody just continues through, all the sheep get dipped, and you can go off and perform. Sheep dip training?
Do people dip sheep?
Yes, I guess. I've never personally dipped a sheep, but no.
Like, are you cleaning the bowl so it's like shampoo or something? Where you like?
Oh no, I think they're doing it for I don't know. Certainly, somebody has to be a sheep dipper around that can answer these questions. But no, for pests and things.
Oh, like for fleas.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I get that.
But that's why so much of training is, right? It's like, all right, we're going to do our safety day. Everybody get in here. We're going to do 8 hours of safety training. And here, first we're going to do how to use a fire extinguisher. And next we're going to do slips, trips, and falls. And, at the end of the day, everybody's going to be super safe. And you sit there and you tune out so much of that.
Do you think the sheep are okay? So sheep are not organic then, if they're getting dipped for fleas. Right? Like the wool that you would wear is probably not organic because it's been treated for pesticides. And I bet
I live on the Texas Gulf Coast. I don't need wool for anything.
I'm the same.
I mean, theoretically.
Oh, look, we have. Okay, thanks for the clarification there. Okay, we can move on. Sorry. I just like.
Do we get a sheep dip update?
Yeah, we do.
In the comments?
Guys, so you would think that I would know this, but North Carolina girl has never heard of it. It's like all tobacco and cotton where I'm from.
Man, I've never been challenged on it before. I realized my sheep ignorance. I have no idea about the care and maintenance of sheep, actually.
I'm excited though. Like I'm glad that they take care of sheep that way. I would hate to be a sheep running around with fleas all the time.
Oh, I'd hate to have wool on anytime. Anyway, no, but. So we've had this process where you've said, okay, gosh, we're going to run people through training. I think it's traditionally been harder to track the smaller interactions and the things we do day in and day out. But that time has largely changed, right? So if I pull up a YouTube video while I'm standing in the kitchen or I'm working on something outside, if I get into a forum on how to repair something, or just sharing information back and forth, right? And we all follow groups depending on whatever type of interest you have, but purely based on affinity, and those are learning processes, right? I mean, I do that and say, oh well, yeah, I am curious how you share this piece of information or do these things. So the reality of it is, right? I mean, we recognize that that learning is a process, right? It takes time. It's it's longitudinal, and it comes from a lot of different places, right? Some of those are imposed on us because we have to do those. Others, you kind of seek out on your own, and driven again kind of by affinity there. But how do we visualize may not be the right word, but how do we capture that or map that interaction between a person and all the things that they do, that becomes learning, and then how do we make that assessment? Because ultimately we're going to still be asked about performance, whether we do training or not. I still need to be able to perform my job, some kind of task, whatever that thing is. And earlier you mentioned you take your star performer, right, and you start looking at their behaviors, backing those out, and say, how is that different than someone who is struggling and needs improvement, to help close those gaps. But some of those things run off the radar, right? There's the, hey, come show me how to do this kind of thing, or today in a digital age, hey, I'm gonna flip the FaceTime around. I want you to look at this and tell me what's wrong. And you could have essentially a subject matter expert in your hand all the time, if your network supports that, or your organization, or however that that support is there. So what is that view? How do we see that kind of information?
So I think that's part of that is a question for the future, because there's just a ton of information out there, and building a comprehensive picture of an individual, even at one particular point in time, is hard. So you have to think of all the varieties of things that influence behavior. So there are things that predict successful behavior. There are things that reflect successful behavior. And those can be very different, because there are some things that are inherent to the person, and there are some things that are inherent to the technology, and some things that are inherent to the interaction. So you have to kind of consider that whole thing. So if you're looking at things that predict successful outcomes, so I know in our industry, there's a lot of back and forth about quote unquote personality testing. So there are some tests that are very lucrative and exist to make people money. And a good measure of that is there a Facebook Gryffindor Harry Potter Avenger analog quiz that you can take? So if there is a test on Facebook that tells you here is your X personality type tied to Lord of the Rings characters, is probably not the test for you. When we talk about personality testing as psychologists, there's a whole field devoted to personality testing. Mm-hmm. Like the best known test is the Big Five, and it's from the 60s. It's been very well validated, and it's a bunch of characteristics like narcissism, which isn't what you think it is, openness to experience, conscientiousness, agreeableness, and OCEA, and I'm forgetting one. Openness to experience, conscientiousness, agreeableness, extroversion, and so it turns out that conscientiousness basically predicts any sort of successful outcome that you could possibly have in your life. If I determine that you're a conscientious person by this test, as this test measures it, and variations of this test measure it, I can predict if you're going to do well in school. I can predict if you're going to do well in your job. I can predict if you're going to do well in basically anything. I can predict if you're going to clean your room, which is now a very valuable skill to have if you have to be in your room all the time, as it turns out. But those are, we talk about those tests, I think, as if they were outcomes, and they're not. They're predictors. So, and there's a million personality tests out there, and they have been academically rigorously validated. The one we use a lot, we use Duckworth's grit scale a lot because resilience is something that the military is very interested in. So, we're very familiar with that one. Self-efficacy is another test that, Bandera's work a couple decades ago at this point. Really, the extent to which you're confident that you know what you're doing. So all of these things predict outcomes, but that's part of who you are. Like, I'm not going to change that about you. I'm not going to make you different in terms of the scale. Another way of thinking about personality testing is if it puts you in a box, it's probably not right. Like, there is nothing that we measure about human behavior that is you are a this or a that. Like, there's nothing about you that is binary. Like, you are a little bit of a lot of things.
Sure, and everything's on a continuum.
Yeah, everything's on a continuum. So if it's going to put you in a box that, like, you are this type, like, that should raise a flag with you, because there's nothing about you that is all or nothing. We are all a little bit of everything, which is a really cool way of thinking about it. But people love putting themselves in boxes and like, oh, I'm this type, that explains everything. But that's not how you work, right? Like, I'm very extroverted, but I can chill here by myself. I'm fine. Anyway. So those are all predictors of outcomes. And then you have to look at what is going on with the individual while they're in whatever experience you're putting them through. And the different kinds of outcomes that you can have are affective. So how do you feel? Like, I can manipulate how you feel, and how you react to something is important, not in the level 2 Kirkpatrick, I care if you like this training sense. Like, I don't care if you like the training. I care if it's developing you effectively in one way or another. Or if you have a very negative reaction to something, then it is not likely that you will participate at all, right? So I care from that perspective. If it's something elective, Brussels sprouts, for example, in my life as an adult, the best part of being an adult is you get to pick what you eat. Like, that is the best part, is that I never have to eat a lima bean.
The best part, man. That's a tall order.
It is. Hands down, I have been on this planet long enough to know the best part of being an adult is that if someone says, would you like some lima beans? I can say, absolutely not. And I don't have to eat them. And I don't have to have them in my house. And there's not a lima bean in that kitchen, and there never will be, because they're disgusting. And I don't know why parents make their kids eat them, because nobody likes them. And if they are lying, and it's cognitive dissonance. But anyway, no, seriously, I have no idea why parents force their kids to eat stuff that they don't like. I would, they're broadening their palate to like things that suck. I mean, life is like that enough. But anyway, so if I don't like lima beans, I'm less likely to eat them. If I don't like the experience you're putting me through, I'm less likely to participate. And this is important when we talk about immersive technology, things like VR and other immersive experiences. It's actually very important, because some people feel very uncomfortable in a headset. Like, and this is not necessarily an age thing. This is like, there are some people that do not like having their vision obstructed, and it doesn't make them feel good. And so they're less likely to participate, and that's a deal breaker, right? Like, you need to know that, or you need to figure out a way to mitigate that. So for a lot of people they're afraid of getting sick in VR, they're afraid, they have heard that, oh my God, I'm going to barf. What you are most likely to get is actually a headache, honestly. Back in the day when I was like coming up in the world, like, VR absolutely made you barf. And a lot of simulators made you very barfy, and simulator sickness has been studied extensively, and what causes it. And it's a proprioceptive thing. It's a mismatch between what your ears tell you and your eyes tell you. And that will make you barf. But it's gotten a lot better resolution, and the resolution of headsets is a lot better now. And so most people now will not barf, but they're afraid of it. So you can mitigate that. And that is actually a training problem, right? So you can sit them down and be like, okay, yeah, we're going to ease you into this. We're going to play Fruit Ninja until you feel good about what you're doing. So affect is actually important, but not in the level 2 sense of the word. So that's an outcome. You can also look at what they know. Like, what they know is important. So changing your cognitive state in a lot of different ways is actually important. And also what you do. So looking at how you behave, especially in immersive technology, usually that's used not just to train like knowledge, it's used to train skills. And if I'm training you on a skill, I need to know how you are acquiring that skill and how you're acquiring it over time. And if this is too hard for you, or if this is too easy for you, and this is where a good data set can help adapt training down the road. The crux of adaptive training and personalized learning is really a good understanding about the learner and what they know. Mm-hmm. And who they are and how they feel and all their experience coming into it and things like that. So if you don't have a good learner model, then you're not really going to be able to personalize anything either. And that's a buzzword, but it's also a way to save a lot of time and money if you do it right. So that behavior, what you know, how you feel, how you interact with other people. There are a lot of team metrics that are very important. So some of the stuff we're looking at now for the Army is communication. So communication and exercises. And if I've got a fire team, I've got like 4 people and they're storming the castle, you know, is the team leader saying the right thing? Is everybody else recognizing it? And communication is a two-way street. So I can say something to you, and as if you acknowledge it, then that's communicating, right? Like I can't just be like talking to myself and consider that to be communicating, but it's really the interaction between people. And some people can say like one word and it means a million things, and some people can say a million words and it means nothing. So, you know, trying to measure communication through recording it and using machine learning to try and pull goodness out of that. So that's important. And then ultimately you want to look at what the organization cares about. So organizational effectiveness. Outside of the government, organizations that invest in training are businesses and they're trying to make money, right? And even schools on some level are concerned about their money. So is it how to allocate resources better? You know, whatever the organization's problem is that they think that they have, are they solving it through training? And part of that is there's a leap of faith that we tend to take, which is if this person is prepared to do their job as well as they possibly could be, I can trust that my problem will be solved, right? So if I know what I'm doing, my organization should be better because I'm well trained. And that's a leap that doesn't always have to be made, because these days, if I'm a salesperson in a company, you can look at my sales outcomes and you can know what training I had and you can know a lot of stuff about me. And like you can answer that question now, but previously there's this leap. And especially in the military, they still make this leap because operational performance is in the battlefield, and that's hard to collect. Although these days they've GPSed everything out there. If you're deployed, all your equipment has GPS in it, your vehicles have GPS, and there's a server in CENTCOM somewhere that knows where everything is at all times. And so you could model that these days. We can model weather and how the weather affects different behavior and stuff like that. But you know, there is on some level still this belief that like, if I take care of you as a person, you're going to take care of my organization. So
interesting.
Yeah, all sorts of stuff that you can measure. But you also have to understand the difference between predicting an outcome and assessing an outcome. And a lot of people, especially with personality testing and looking at demographics and experience and stuff like that, those things are critically important, but they're important in terms of saying, is this the right intervention for you based on
moving forward?
No. Yeah. Versus saying like your personality is everything, because it's not.
No. Interesting.
I mean, but yours is.
Hey.
Hello. I'm just chiming in. Any last thoughts? This conversation has been very interesting. We've gone from learner models to sheep dipping to everything else in between. The example you had given, Jen, about the training for women with the rifles, that was really interesting, because not only did they have to make those adjustments on the weapons, but it seemed like there was other biases that were already in place to make it seem like women didn't do as well, when really the data probably showed that they were doing well for what they were working with.
Yeah. So, and you know, the other thing about that particular example is that there's just so much that goes into it. So if you think about marksmanship, this is probably one of the most complicated skills that people can do. Do you guys play golf or not?
It's been a number of years since I picked up a golf club, but I tried.
Yeah, so for people who aren't like super familiar with marksmanship, I try to use the golf analogy. But so when you learn how to use a weapon or you learn how to swing a golf club, there's the cognitive piece, which is like, I have to know what to do, right? Like I have to know this is how I hold my golf club right, and here's like the logistics of this and how physics works, and there's some aspect to that. With marksmanship also, there's some declarative knowledge that you have to know. Like you have to know about ballistics, and you have to know like how the weather is going to impact your gun. You have to know how to clean your weapon. There's stuff that you have to know. There's also stuff that your body has to do, right? So like you have to turn your hips in a certain way at the right time, and you have to move your arms in a certain way if you're swinging a golf club. And the same thing with holding a weapon is there's a certain way that you have to do it. And getting what you know into what your body does is a process, and that's a process that takes time through practice. They have implemented, and there's just so much that goes into that. So they have, hey Judy, they have implemented different kinds of strength training for women in the Marine Corps to get them up to speed, and part of that is wrist strength. So our wrists are not as inherently as strong as they could be. So a lot of what this particular lieutenant colonel that I know has implemented is looking at developing different kinds of upper body strength in women to compensate for that. So there is an aspect of it that is training, it's physical training, but there's so much that goes into it, and solving any piece of that puzzle should improve outcomes, but really to understand that, you need to understand the whole picture.
Right. Understanding the whole picture and then figure out what piece needs to be revised or improved or changed to get the outcome that you want, right? So hello, Judy. I'm going to pop in her comment here real quick. This is why to get good representation when designing, testing, and products. Yes, ma'am. In case anybody missed it, Judy had a great session last week on making sure that your e-learning is representative. And it's still available on our Facebook page, by the way. So this has been a wonderful conversation. I've laughed. I've been super interested in everything you had to say. I knew I was really looking forward to this conversation because I wanted, we so often only get a chance to say hi and bye at trade shows. And so this was really great to hear all this information. I was looking for your mobile app, so I would love to get the link and plop it in and share it with everyone. So I couldn't find it, and I imagine there was probably a play on words for the app. Is it Sense as in CENTS, or is it Sense as in
$.
Ah, okay. All right. Well, I will look for it, get the link, and add it into the comments below, as well as tweet it out for you. And if you are watching this video replay, please feel free to add any comments or questions, and we'll make sure that it gets to Dr. Murphy for answering. Let's see, Ms. Katz, great thoughts. Looking forward to going back and catching the first half. Yes, thank you.
You need to listen to the sheep part because that is probably the most educational.
Oh no, and that's why we want to make sure that the video remains on the page so that folks can go back and catch the replay or catch any information that they may have missed. So thank you again for your time today and participating. This has been a really great format, having a conversation.
Well, actually, I was just going to say I really need another hour because I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about data privacy and establishing a trust relationship between systems, and that's so we'll have to recycle anyway at some point. We'll
absolutely.
Continue on.
Would love to have you back on.
All day, you know me. I'll talk.
And by the way, I heard your comments at the beginning about how now that Anne's hopped off, you can talk about Tiger King.
Although it's basically if Florida Man was a show, yeah.
So it would fit right here in Texas. It doesn't. It's not.
It's like he's in Oklahoma, right?
Yeah.
Carol Baskin is our problem. That's is our problem.
So, but then there's a psychological inventory that will classify you as one of the characters now in the show, or is this something that you're working? This is something you're working on.
Yeah, that's real, and that is basically the gospel. And if it tells you that you're Carol Baskin, then you just keep yourself away from everybody else and hide the sardine oil.
All right, well, thank you again. And on that note, we will see you at the next session in about half an hour with Ray Jimenez talking about digital disruptions and how to scale for the future in L&D. And again, if you're watching the replay of the amazing Dr. Jen Murphy's conversation with Duncan, please feel free to drop in your comments and questions. And we'll see you soon. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jen. Bye-bye.